The village seemed to hide. It was old, so very old. They called it Miazanoapte. That means midnight, a good name for it. It held on tight to the bottom of the Carpathian Mountains, sharp mountain tops clawed at the dark, bruised-looking sky. Houses leaned over. Stones looked like they were crying. The wood in the houses sighed, like it was tired from so many years. Only a few lights blinked in the deep twilight. Most of windows were like dark, empty eyes just watching. It felt like it was always fall in this place. Leaves, dry and brown, whispered secrets as they blew across the old stone paths. Silence was like a heavy blanket here. It made it hard to breathe. Even the air felt old, like it tasted of wet dirt and things rotting away. This was a place people had left behind. Time moved differently in Miazanoapte. It twisted around. It felt stuck. The new modern world was like a story from far away, a dream they almost forgot. Here, shadows stretched out long and thin. They danced around like they were alive, and it made you feel uneasy. The wind, when it dared to blow, sounded like sad sighs coming through the bare branches of twisted old trees. Villagers, if you saw them, moved like ghosts. Their faces showed a quiet sadness. A deep old fear lived in their eyes. They knew the old stories. They felt the cold breath of the mountains. They understood the darkness that made its home in the heart of their dying village. The biggest thing in the village, even though it was falling apart, was the church, St. Enoch's. It sat on a small hill like a dark shadow against the fading light. Its stone walls were black from time and weather. The steeple, like a broken finger, pointed up at the sky as if it was blaming something. It was a scary place. It used to be a holy place, but now it felt bad. The villagers never looked right at it for too long. They walked in curves to stay out of its shadow. It was always there, a reminder they didn't want. It felt like a heavy weight on the whole village. It seemed to pulse with a quiet, evil energy. The iron gate to the churchyard groaned. It hung crooked on rusty hinges. Weeds grew thick on the path, choking it. Gravestones, tilted over and covered in moss, looked like rotten teeth in a sick mouth. The big wooden doors of St. Enoch's were bent out of shape. They seemed to stick out like something inside was pushing them. Stained glass windows, once bright with pictures of saints and angels, were mostly broken. The pieces left showed broken halos and crying eyes. A feeling of deep loneliness clung to the building. It wasn't just empty. It felt cursed. It felt hungry. It waited. The curse was old. Its name was whispered, St. Enoch's Blight. No one knew how it truly started. Time had hidden it. Fear had hidden it. Some said a bad priest had done something terrible to the holy table in the church. Others talked about an old evil spirit, older than the church itself, trapped under the church building. Whatever started it, the blight was real. It lived in the cold air. It stuck to the crumbling stones. It was like a poison in the village's heart. The old people remembered stories. Their grandparents had told them, stories of darkness, stories of a mark that couldn't be washed away. The blight wasn't just a curse that brought death. It was much worse. It was a taking. It ate your spirit. People said that those touched by St. Enoch's blight would lose themselves, bit by bit. Their souls would dry up. Their bodies would become just empty shells for something else, something old, something evil. A grey, ash-coloured mark would appear, a handprint, cold when you touched it, a mark showing you were doomed. This mark was the beginning of the end. It was a sign that the darkness had taken another person. The fear of this mark was total. The people of Miazanoapte lived with this fear. It changed their days. It haunted their nights. They stayed away from St. Enoch's. They never said its name after dark. Children were warned to stay away with scary tales. Crosses were hung on every door. Herbs were burned to keep its evil away. These little things were their weak shield against the growing darkness. They knew the blight was patient. It had waited for hundreds of years. It could wait even longer. Their fear was a real thing. You could almost taste it in the metal taste of the mountain air. It was something passed down from parents to children, old tales told of people who were taken. A young woman who walked too close. She came back changed. Her eyes were empty. A grey mark was on her throat. She disappeared days later. A woodcutter who tried to find shelter there during a storm. He was found talking nonsense. The mark burned onto his back. He threw himself off the cliffs. These stories were not just stories, they were warnings, burned into the memory of the village. Each story made the fear stronger. St. Enoch's was not just an empty building, it was a hunter, it was a doorway, and the blight was its never-ending hunger. Then Adrian came. He came from Bucharest, a city of big buildings and electric lights, a world far away from Miazanoapte. He was a history expert, a man of books and facts. His clothes were modern, his mind was smart. He carried a leather bag full of notebooks and doubt. The dying village, the scary church were interesting to him. Old things from a time long ago. He saw history, he saw old stories. He did not see a real danger. He found the feeling of the place old and spooky, but in an interesting way. The mountains were grand, not scary. The silence was peaceful, not heavy. Adrian was there to study. He studied forgotten churches. He wrote down local legends. St. Enoch's was a prize, a faraway, untouched example of very old building style. The stories of its curse were, to him, just an interesting little detail, just an example of country folks' old beliefs. He listened politely to the villagers. He nodded at their fearful tales. He wrote down their warnings in his neat handwriting. He called it interesting local stories. He smiled kindly like they were children when they insisted the blight was real. He had heard such fears before. They always disappeared when you thought clearly about them. He spoke with the village elder, an old man with eyes like faded photographs. The elder begged him, "Do not go to the church, young man. Some doors are best left unopened." Adrian thanked him for his worry. He promised him he would be careful. But his mind was already listing things about how the church was built. He imagined the thrill of finding lost details under layers of dust and decay. He was a man of learning. His tools were clear thinking and watching things closely. He believed in what he could see, what he could touch, what he could prove. Magical or ghostly things had no place in his neat and tidy world. Inside, Adrian laughed quietly to himself. St. Enoch's blight, he thought. A charmingly dark and spooky story. He saw the fear in their eyes. He felt sorry for them because of it. Trapped by not knowing better, tied down by old ways. He was different. He knew better. He looked for truth, not myths. The church was a building. The curse was a story. He would explore St. Enoch's. He would write down what he found. He would write his paper. And then he would leave Mizanoapte, taking its interesting old legends with him, saved in ink. He had no fear of shadows. He had no fear of old stories. Adrian pushed open the groaning gates of St. Enoch's. The sound echoed in the creepy quiet. He stepped onto the path, thick with weeds. The air inside the church grounds felt colder, thicker. He ignored the tingling feeling on his skin. He walked up to the huge wooden doors. He found them unlocked, or maybe they had come open because they were old and no one took care of them. With a grunt, he pushed one door open with a lot of effort. A cloud of dust puffed out. It carried the smell of old times, of rotting wood, of something else. Something that smelled a bit like metal and made him uneasy. The darkness inside was total. He clicked on his flashlight. The light cut a path through the darkness. Tiny bits of dust danced like little spirits. Broken church seats lay scattered around like fallen soldiers. Cobwebs covered everything, thick as dark, heavy blankets. Faded old paintings were on the walls. Saints with chipped faces and missing eyes stared with no expression. The silence was deep, broken only by the drip of water somewhere far inside, and the sound of his own breathing, which seemed too loud, too alive. He moved towards the altar, the holy table. It stood at the far end, large and important looking, covered in shadows. A lonely, holy feeling filled the air. His light moved over the altar. It was carved from dark stone, worn smooth by hundreds of years of use. He ran his hand along its edge, cold, so cold. He began to look at it closely, noting the style of the carving, how the stone had worn away. Then his foot hit something, not stone, but wood, or a loose, flat stone tile. He knelt down. He brushed away the dirt and dust. A large, square piece of slate lay a little crooked. He pushed at it. It shifted. A hollow sound echoed from underneath. As a history expert, his heart beat faster. This was not expected. This was a discovery. This was what he was looking for. He wedged his fingers into the gap. He pulled. The stone was heavy. It scraped against the floor around it. Slowly, with much effort, he lifted one edge. He propped it up. The beam of his flashlight shone into the opening, a set of narrow stone steps going down into blackness, a crypt, a hidden room under the altar. For a moment he forgot all his doubts. Instead he felt a rush of excitement, the kind a student feels when learning something new. The villagers had never said anything about this. Maybe they did not know, or maybe this was the heart of their fear. He had to know. He had to see. Adrian went down, and with each step the stairs creaked under him. The air, well, it grew colder and smelled more damp and old. The smell of ancient dust was very strong, and under that smell was another, faint but rotten. It was like dried flowers mixed with something else, something bad. His flashlight beam bounced off the damp stone walls. The passage was narrow, tight, and he could feel the weight of the church above him, the weight of the earth pushing down. When he reached the bottom, a small square room opened up in front of him. It was carved out of the solid rock, rough and simple, a place of deep, quiet stillness, the silence of a grave. In the center of the crypt there was one thing, a sarcophagus, a long, low stone box. It was carved from the same dark stone as the altar. Its surface was covered in strange, fancy carvings. Not saints, not angels, but signs he did not know. They seemed to twist and turn in the flickering light of his torch, feeling strange and, well, disturbing. The lid was a single, heavy piece of stone, sealed tight. There was no lock he could see, no clear way to open it. It had been here for hundreds of years, untouched, unseen, waiting. A thrill, cold and sharp, ran through Adrian. This was an important discovery. He had to open it. The history expert in him needed to. What secrets were inside? What answers to the church's dark past? He set down his bag and looked for his tools, a strong pry bar, a chisel, a hammer. The local tales of a curse seemed far away now, faded by the promise of finding something new. He put the pry bar at the edge of the lid and tapped it with the hammer. The sound was shockingly loud in the small space. He worked carefully, step by step, as sweat formed like little drops on his forehead. Not from working hard, but from a strange, growing feeling of tension. With a final loud, scraping sound of stone on stone, the lid shifted. It slid sideways, just enough. He looked inside, and there lay a body preserved like a mummy, wrapped in what looked like old crumbling cloth. It looked so old it seemed impossible, yet it was still in perfect shape. As he leaned closer, a sudden rush of wind swept through the crypt. How could that be? There were no openings. The flashlight flickered and a fine grey dust knocked loose from the tomb swirled in the air. It settled on his chest, on his clothes. He coughed as the air was suddenly freezing, and he felt a tingling feeling, a deep coldness that wasn't normal. Adrian stared at the mummy. Its skin was like old dry paper stretched tight over bone. Its face was thin, and its eyes looked sunken. A feeling of great oldness came from it. He reached out a hesitant finger, then stopped. A sudden, scary feeling he couldn't explain washed over him. The cold in the crypt grew stronger. It seemed to come from the stone box itself. He felt a tingling sensation on his chest where the dust had settled. He ignored it, blaming nerves and the small, tight space. He took photographs, made notes, then carefully slid the lid back into place. Mostly. Later that night, back in his small rented room, the uneasy feeling stayed with him. He tried to write his notes, but his mind kept going back to the crypt, back to the mummy. He felt chilled, even though the air in the room was stuffy. He unbuttoned his shirt to let his skin breathe. That is when he saw it, in the dim mirror. A faint, greyish mark on his chest, exactly where the dust had fallen. It was the shape of a handprint, thin fingers, a small hand. He scrubbed at it hard with soap and water. It did not fade. It did not wash away. It stayed there. A grey, ash-coloured stain on his skin. He started seeing things soon after as he lay in bed trying to sleep. Quick pictures flashed behind his eyelids. The dark crypt, the staring, mummified face, skinny, bony hands reaching for him. He sat straight up in bed, heart pounding, cold sweat on his forehead. He heard whispers just at the edge of his hearing. Hissing, unclear. They seemed to come from the corners of the room, from the shadows themselves. He told himself it was because he was tired, stressed, or that his mind was playing tricks on him because of the villagers' stories. But a small seed of doubt had been planted. It began to grow in the darkness of his mind. Sleep did not help him escape. When he finally fell asleep, nightmares bothered him a lot. The handprint on his chest felt cold, a patch of icy numbness. He woke up often, feeling as if someone or something was in the room with him, watching, waiting. His calm, thoughtful way of looking at things started to break. His sensible reasons didn't seem to make sense anymore. The mark was real. The cold was real. The growing feeling of dread was definitely real. St. Enoch's blight. The words echoed in his memory, no longer just interesting, no longer something he could ignore, a cold string of real fear wrapped around his heart. Days passed. The ashen mark on Adrian's chest got darker. It grew clearer, from a faint grey to a very dark charcoal black. It burned with a strange coldness, a cold that went deep into his bones. He felt it all the time, a chilling reminder of the open tomb. His first worry got worse. It turned into a strong, constant fear that something bad was going to happen. He felt unsafe, easy to hurt, as if the mark was a signal calling out to something in the shadows, something that now knew his name, where he was. His fear. He started to avoid mirrors. He could not stand to see the brand on his skin. People could see changes in his body. His eyes grew sunken. Dark circles grew beneath them like bruises. His skin turned yellowish and pale. He lost his appetite. Food tasted like ash in his mouth. Sleep became a forgotten thing. He stopped taking care of how he looked. His clothes were messy, his hair not combed. His movements, once sure and steady, became shaky and clumsy. He would twitch, he would jump at sudden noises. He looked like he was being chased by ghosts. The lively history expert from Bucharest was disappearing, turning into a thin, scared ghost himself. The suffering in his mind got worse. The visions were no longer quick. They were clear and came into his mind even when he didn't want them to. He saw the crypt all the time, saw the mummy, its eyes now opened, staring into his soul. The whispers became clearer. A voice, old, rough from the throat. It spoke in a language he did not understand, yet he felt its meaning, what it wanted. It was a voice that ordered him, that wanted to own him. He started talking to himself, mumbling answers to the thing he couldn't see, arguing with the shadows. His clear thinking shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was going crazy. The villagers noticed the change. They had seen signs like this before in their parents' stories, in their own darkest fears. They made the sign of the cross when he passed. They hurried their children indoors. They whispered that St. Enoch's blight had taken another. Adrian, once the doubtful outsider, was now part of their dark old stories. He became another shadow drifting through the dying streets of Miazanoapte, marked. Doomed. He no longer tried to understand the curse. He was becoming a part of it. The darkness was eating him up from the inside. A pull, a call he couldn't fight. It drew Adrian from his miserable room. It was deep night. The moon, a thin, weak-looking piece, hid behind thick clouds. Miazanoapte was buried in darkness, yet he knew the way. His feet moved as if something else was controlling him towards St. Enoch's. The church stood on its hill, a black gaping mouth against a blacker sky. It seemed to breathe, to call to him. The rusted gate creaked open, as if it was expecting him. He did not carry a flashlight this time. He did not need one. A faint light from inside him seemed to show him the way. The cold of the mark on his chest was a light guiding him. He stumbled through the main part of the church, past the broken seats, the dark altar. His movements were like a puppet's. He reached the stone tile he had moved. It slid aside too easily. As if by magic, he went down into the crypt. The air was thick, heavy, alive. The rotten smell was stronger now, too strong. He reached the bottom of the steps. He looked towards the stone box. It was open, wide open. The heavy stone lid lay on the floor beside it, as if thrown there by a great force. And the stone box itself, it was empty. And the mummy was gone. Gap 2S vanished. A presence filled the small room. It was something he could almost touch, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. It pressed in on him from all sides. A shadow separated itself from the deepest blackness in the corner of the crypt. It had no clear form. It was a moving pillar of blacker darkness. Eyes, like hot glowing coals, looked at him from inside the swirling darkness. They held an old wisdom, a huge, chilling evil. This was what caused the whispers, the cold, the blight, the creature from another place. The demon of St. Enoch's. It spoke, not with sound, not with words that shook the air. It spoke right into Adrian's mind. The voice was a mix of old languages, of pain, of power. Its thoughts were cold, sharp, like pieces of ice. Asterisk, you have broken the protections, you have ended my long sleep. Adrian stood without moving. He could not control himself. His eyes reflected the terrible light of the demon's gaze. The history expert was gone. Only an empty body remained, listening, obeying, in the silent, evil meeting. An orange light colored the bottom of the night clouds. It beat like a heart. It grew. The villagers of Miazanoapte woke up one by one, woken by an unnatural light, by a loud crackling sound that covered up the normal sounds of the night. They stumbled from their homes, their faces pale in the blinking light. St. Enoch's was on fire. Flames, taller than the old church tower, grabbed at the dark sky. They twisted like spirits in pain. The fire was so strong it seemed impossible, eating up stone and wood with an evil hunger. It was a sight that was awful but beautiful, like a giant fire for burning a cursed place. They gathered at a safe distance, a silent crowd watching in wonder and fear. Fear and a strange feeling of relief mixed on their faces. The heat washed over them even from far away, the air filled with the smell of burning wood, burning stone, burning history. No one spoke of trying to fight the fire. They knew this was no ordinary fire. This was a cleaning, or perhaps something else, something finishing its work. The church, a thing that caused fear for generations, was being eaten up, wiped away from the land, its dark secrets turning to ash and smoke, carried away on the night wind. Dawn broke grey and sad. The fire had burned itself out. Only a smoking pile of broken pieces was left on the hill. Burned wood, heaps of blackened stone. St. Enoch's was gone. The heavy feeling that had hung over Miazano Apte for hundreds of years seemed to have lifted, just a little. Slowly and carefully, a few brave people walked towards the smoking pieces. The ground was hot under their feet, the air still thick with the sharp, bitter smell of things being destroyed. They searched. For what? They weren't entirely sure. Perhaps for an answer, perhaps for a sign. There was no sign of Adrian, no body, no trace of the doubtful history expert from Bucharest. It was as if he had simply disappeared, completely eaten by the fire. Or perhaps taken by something else before the flames began. The villagers searched among the broken pieces where the altar once stood near the hidden entrance to the crypt, and there they found it, burned into a large, cracked, flat stone, a perfect handprint, black, marked deep, as if a hand made of hot ash had pressed itself into the hard stone. The blight had left its final, indelible mark. The church was gone, but the legend would live on, stronger than ever.